they want to. Talk don't bother me.
And welcome to Let Them Talk. I'm Paul DeRienzo.
And I'm Miss Joan Moossy.
And Philip VanAver is our guest once again. Welcome, Philip, from the Lower East Side.
It's always a pleasure to be with you on this on Let Them Talk. Let Them Talk.
Yeah.
And
either way, I got both names.
we're going to be talking tonight about Miriam Friedlander, who was born in 1914 and died in October of last year, 2009. And when I've been here before, we've discussed the Tompkins Square Park riot of 1988, which took place when Miriam was on the City Council. And we've also discussed various land use issues in the Lower East Side. And the area that we're going to be talking about tonight is Lower Manhattan, below 14th Street. And Paul and Joni and I are all longtime residents of this area. And Miriam Friedlander was on the City Council. She was elected in 1973, which meant she started serving in 1974 when she was 60 years old, and she stayed.
Oh, so this is a later career for her.
Yes, and that will, she served until she was defeated in 1991. And she was there for 18 years. So we're talking about a period of time.
There's no shame in losing an election.
No, but
I can tell you. I'm aware.
I've never, since I've never run, I can't remember running for anything except for county committee. But Paul and I knew Miriam. I first became, the first time I laid eyes on her was 1973. When she came to petition in my building with another woman to get on the ballot. And, well, at the time that Miriam was elected, I think it's important for us to understand this, the form of city government in New York was somewhat different. There was a three-part, the mayor, the city council, and what was known as the Board of Estimate. So power was divided between three bodies instead of two.
And so the Board of Estimate doesn't exist anymore.
It doesn't exist, and it had certain functions. It was made up of the borough presidents and the elected official like the controller and the president of the city council. And so the balance of power was slightly different. Now, Miriam became city council person at during one of the worst periods in the city's history. That was a period of the fiscal crisis, where the city was losing population rapidly, and more importantly, was losing jobs. So Miriam had a very tough job. And now, as I said, we're going to talk about the area of Lower Manhattan, and her district included Chinatown and the Lower East Side, or then what the area is called the East Village, and this included area was quite diverse as far as the racially diverse, Chinese, Puerto Rican, mixed ethnic group.
Now, Philip, what did Miriam do before she got into electoral politics?
Yes, please show this picture.
What kind of a career did she have as a younger woman?
Well, Miriam was actually born in Pittsburgh.
Oh.
And she came to New York City as a child, and she lived in the Bronx. And her father was in the insurance business. She came from basically a middle-class background. And she was a graduate of NYU, her family, as I understand from this brochure that was this was printed for her memorial service, which was held at the City Council chambers on November 12th. And so some of the information that I'm going to be discussing with you came from this, rather than our reminiscences of hers. But she was she married when she was about 25 years old, 25 years old, and she had a son who is like 4 years younger than I am. Which makes him look like I'm 70, so he would be. Anyway, and she was a housewife in Queens.
Okay.
And then as I understand it, she was a school teacher in New York. And we will talk about another aspect of Miriam's life. I want to get that out of the way. Miriam was involved in left politics in the city of New York. And I don't really know the specifics. And her cousin told me that Miriam had been fired as a school teacher because of the Smith Act, which was an act of Congress that was promulgated in the late 40s or early 50s, which made it very difficult for people who had association with the Communist Party. And this continued. It was among those of us who knew Miriam, who worked with Miriam, who were involved in the political community. This was a no-go area. But as recently as 2005, I was talking to a resident of our neighborhood who lives, a hedge fund manager and a dabbler in Lower East Side politics by the name of Aaron Susnick. When I said I was very friendly with Miriam, he said, "She's a communist."
Oh, dear.
And so
I don't think it has that same impact as it might have had 40 years ago.
Yes, but the point
But
was
it stuck with her.
It stuck with her. It stuck with her.
And this sort of happened when she was in her 40s, in middle age, in the middle of her career.
Well, I think that her involvement with left politics, you see, she was born in 1914. She would have been 15 years old when the Depression started. Right, something like that. 15 years. Her college years were the years of the Depression, and both of her parents, who, according to the information in this brochure that was published. Now, I want us to look at a picture that was taken of. Some of you may not have heard of Bella Abzug. Bella Abzug was a congresswoman from the Upper West Side who ran for both senator and mayor. And you can see the picture of Bella.
She's the one in the hat.
Yeah, the lady with the hat, with Miriam. And if people felt that Miriam was in any way damaged goods, someone like Bella Abzug, a consummate politician, would have had nothing to do with her. And so in the years that I knew Miriam...
I'll never forget when they tried to kick Bella Abzug off the stage at the Peace Rally in Washington in 1973 when I was 16 years old.
Well,
She didn't get along well with the communists.
Well, she was a person who was Miriam was very much accepted. During the years that I knew her, she was very accepted by the mainstream progressive Democrats. And
she was a Democrat.
She was a Democrat. She always, in the years I knew her, she did not express any views that were anything much to the left of Jimmy Carter. And however, she was a person. We talk more about her work on the city council in the years, which I hope to make this relevant to people who are not residents of the Lower East Side. But during the years when the beginning of Miriam's service on the city council, there was mass abandonment of buildings throughout many neighborhoods. In all, well, at least, I don't know about the Staten Island, but certainly Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and Manhattan, there was as the city became depopulated, and as the jobs for working class people diminished, the number of jobs, there was abandonment of building. People were unable to pay.
This is the early 70s.
The early 70s,
through the late 70s.
Through the late,
into the
we're
mid-80s.
talking about it beginning in the early 70s.
In 74.
It began, and I live on East 6th Street between A and B. I've lived there since 1969, and at one point, 1/3 of the buildings were abandoned. And this was a situation that Miriam found herself in when she became city council person. Now, Miriam was, as I said earlier, she was 59 when she was elected, but she had a long history on the Lower East Side. She grew up in the Bronx, and she lived in Sunnyside, Queens when she was married, but she had lived also on East 6th Street since the 1960s. And so she was familiar with the area, and at the time that Miriam served on the council, especially during the Abraham Beam was elected mayor at the same time that Miriam was elected to the city council. That's 1973.
She did a lot better than he did. He didn't last more than term.
Well, he was defeated by Ed Koch. Bella Abzug also ran in that election.
Oh,
but there was
So she served with Beam, Koch,
and Dinkins.
And Dinkins, okay.
And Dinkins. She was out by the time Giuliani came along. But the big issue in our neighborhood, that's the one where the three of us lived, was the city-owned properties. And because of its the value of the land, potentially,
Its proximity to Midtown Manhattan, to downtown Manhattan,
yeah,
to jobs.
And people realized that that it would be property with value. The city had been actually selling lots for $1. The site where Christodoro House is, which is a high-rise building that was built for charitable purposes and was taken over by the city about the time of the beginning of the Second World War, was sold for less than $100,000 in the 1970s.
How much does an apartment in there go for today?
Well, the building
really?
was rapidly changed hands for a couple of million. And this was the kind of thing that Miriam and many of her allies were very much opposed to. They felt there should be an orderly disposition of city-owned property.
not profiteering.
Yeah, not just in her district, but generally throughout the city.
Not a land rush.
Yeah, and she incurred the wrath of other elected officials, like Congressman Bill Green, who was a Republican, was replaced by Carolyn Maloney, and he was linked with the real estate industry. And they demonized Miriam because of her opposition to the privatization of this property. And Miriam supported organizations like Adopt a Building and the other housing organizations and the homesteading. Now, I don't know whether the homesteading program, how that, other areas of New York City, I don't know, but it was very, she supported it on the city council in her district in order so that people could fix up buildings and gain ownership of the apartments, but they would be permanently affordable. They would not could be sold on the open market. And that was one of her major concerns, but she butted heads with especially with the Koch administration about those issues. Now, as I said, this was a very difficult. It seems as if we have difficult periods in New York on the average about every 8 years. I think I'm not going to say 5 years.
Something like that. That was. There was actually a point in the late 70s and early 80s when people could say, like, the city wasn't going to make it.
Yes, it wasn't
going to exist. It was going to be like some movie.
Well, this was, I mean...
Escape from New York.
Gore Vidal wrote in the New York Review of Books, this was like in the 1970s, that New York is visibly dying. And this was the time when President Gerald Ford's, the headline was, Ford to city, drop dead.
Right.
They wouldn't come up with any money.
Yeah,
The federal aid.
This was the political atmosphere that was prevalent when Miriam became councilperson, and then it continued. Now,
I wonder why she decided she wanted to do that.
well, Miriam has always been political. This is something which this brochure, and she had founded an organization called the Phoenix Democratic Club, and the only person that I know personally who was a member of that club was Chino Garcia, currently the head of Charis, and he was a member of that. He had been working with the IWW, so it definitely had a leftist history. Yeah. And she, when she ran in 1973, she ran against a host of candidates. She wasn't like it wasn't like a one-on-one or one of.
It was a pool of people.
And Miriam, besides being a very progressive person, was a consummate politician who put together a coalition made up of Chinatown, made up of the residents of the various projects in her district, and what was called the tenement district, the area where Paul and I live, between Houston and 14th Street and east of 3rd Avenue is referred to as the tenement district because it is mostly made up of
walk-ups, 5-story, 4-story, 5-story, 3-story, 4-story, 5-story walk-ups.
Yeah,
a lot of them are old, like 100. Mine is 150 years old.
Yes, and Miriam was one of the things that, as I may have mentioned this before, that Miriam was absolutely opposed to was the demolition of the city-owned buildings. And this was a battle that Miriam had allies in this, but her lasting legacy is at least the side streets of the area referred to generally as the East Village will be preserved because of her efforts. And many of those buildings, like the ones on my block, have all been rehabilitated, whether for private purposes or public purposes. And in the period where Miriam was on the council, she was constantly attacked because of her support for social programs and facilities. And her enemies, which were legion, she had the same enemies I had. So they opposed, residences, facilities for the mentally ill homeless. Or of course, this was the height of the AIDS epidemic. Also occurred.
Need for so much.
Any sort of AIDS housing, they totally opposed.
Was also something which was the whole issue of AIDS was something which reached its crescendo while Miriam was on the council.
They opposed the needle exchange. They opposed anything that seemed to get in the way.
Harm reduction. They had a big.
Well, anything that they wanted the old, the poorer people, the funky people who made the East Village for all those years, they wanted them all to leave, except for a few. Like you could have a few people who they put up on a pedestal and call a star, so they could, sell that as they wanted to sell the park as a amenity in the neighborhood, but not too much of it.
Well, it was something that because Miriam was very outspoken in her support of these programs and the
lower depths,
these organizations, and because Miriam was such a smart politician and had such a firm grip on her district, during the years where they were never able to get really strong candidates to run against her.
Then can we jump ahead a little bit?
Sure.
Let's jump back in a way to the events of the summer of 1988. What did that do to her? Was that the beginning of the end of her career, or was it a great moment? Did she stand up and represent something importantly in that career? But she went down in an election defeat right after that.
Yes.
Did it contribute to that?
One of the things was that Miriam supported services for the homeless and for other in the park, and she was at loggerheads with the 9th Precinct. The night when you asked me about the riot, there was a report written. It was called the Benjamin Ward. He was the police chief,
commissioner, or whatever.
Commissioner, the police commissioner, and he talked about the politicizing of the 9th Precinct, and the 9th Precinct Council, which is run by Phil Alumia, was very opposed to Miriam, and these were issues where she could be attacked from the right, and many
soft on crime,
and many residents in the neighborhood blamed her for because conditions in the neighborhood were very bad throughout the 70s and 80s. There were lots of problems, lots of drug addiction. These are not problems that the city council person can solve. I mean, this is they can address them, and she. But she never attempted to exploit these issues for her own personal good. And when the riot occurred, it's very interesting. Both the riot of August 1988 occurred about a week after Miriam left for her yearly vacation. Her son lived out in California. The destruction of the band shell in Tompkins Square Park in 1991 occurred also in August, like when Miriam was
away.
When she was away, you see, and you know, when the cat's away, the mice will play, and you know, one of the things I want to kind of go back a little bit. You see, Miriam came out of the when she was elected. The Vietnam War was still going
happening,
on. And you know, that was a big issue.
3 more years after that.
In the Democratic Party, in the country, and in the city. And Miriam was staunchly associated with the anti-war movement. And many of the powerful figures in the Democratic Party were never spoke like the recently retired Robert Morgenthau, never really came out against the war. No. You know, they never, the New York Times was wishy-washy about the war. And it was very interesting. Miriam,
they didn't want to lose.
And you know, Miriam was defeated eventually because she was redistricted. There was
many years later after that.
Following the 1990 census, you know, the City Council was reapportioned, the lines were redrawn, and Miriam lost Chinatown. And Chinatown had also been one of her stronghold. And she was very knowledgeable with various groups down there. And Miriam was a member, I should have added this before, the Village Independent Democrats, which had a strong, like Margaret Chin, who was recently elected to the City Council, was a state committee woman from the VID, and so that was one of the things. And her district now extended to Fifth Avenue and 35th Street. You know, so
it went the other way.
It went the other way.
A much wealthier area.
Well, it wasn't. It was partially as an outgrowth of the riot of 1988 that you asked me about, and the attempt of Mayor Koch to a shelter, a men's shelter on East First Street. Miriam opposed that too. She opposed it. The Village Independent Democrats opposed it. The organization I was associated with, Lower East Side Joint Planning Council, opposed it. But then an organization which eventually her successor, Antonio Pagan, came out of the struggle around the First Street shelter. So but the redistricting was basically an attempt to get rid of Miriam, and because of her.
Right.
And it worked.
It worked because there was a three-way race. Antonio Pagan, Miriam Friedlander, and someone named Philip Howard, who was wrote op-ed pages for the New York Times and all that kind of thing, and was more likely to appeal. And he lived in the Gramercy Park area. But Miriam had served 18 years in the city council, and after she, I wanted to touch briefly on what Miriam did in the years following her service on the city council.
Right, because she
handed me that.
Oh yes.
And yeah, Miriam. This is called Women Fighting Poverty, and there's a conference report. This one is from 2003.
But this was an annual event.
Yes, Miriam did this for several years. I just happened to discover that I had one of these, and Miriam, the very topic of it, women fighting poverty, really is very significant because of her lasting concern for people who have less in our society. And I can't imagine anybody on the present city council sponsoring something of this nature. I mean, it shows how much the council has changed. Of course, when Miriam was on the city council, there weren't term limits. There weren't term limits, and the
and there aren't any more, right?
Now you couldn't be a city councilman person for 18 years.
No. Now you can again, right?
You can run for one more term.
Oh, but not unlimited terms. Okay.
So now it could be 12 years.
Because of the deal that was made between Ron Lauder and Mike Bloomberg, you know, they'll go back to 2 years after
After him.
Right, when he's gone.
but the current members will
Are eligible for
some
three.
promise they will never run for third term.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens in 3 or 4
Right.
years.
Got a couple of minutes late. I want one more thing I want to talk about. We didn't talk about what we've discussed earlier was her connection to the Spanish Civil War.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
Reminds you how old she is.
Philip VanAver is joining us from the Lower East Side. We're talking about Miriam Friedlander, who passed away recently at the age of 95, who was a city council person there for 18 very colorful years. And we're just discussing
you know, I knew that Miriam was concerned with the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. I know that she wanted to name an area on the 3rd Avenue near Stuyvesant Street, a little triangle, but apparently she couldn't get anywhere with that during her years. But I did learn, and it says in the this brochure that we showed you earlier, that her brother, who was a younger brother, Paul Friedlander, who was a very brilliant scholar, was killed in the Spanish Civil War, I think in 1937, 1938, and you know, Miriam was very that was part of her heritage, and
It's very influential to lose a sibling.
Yes,
at
I mean,
a young age.
Yeah.
you know, she told me this.
He wasn't fighting for Franco.
No, he wasn't. I'm not sure. I presume he was with the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. I'm not 100% sure. It just mentions his death.
Yeah.
But you know, Miriam was a person who went on to play a role. It's hard to in New York City politics. It's hard to, at this point...
Tell us about the New York Times obituary.
Oh, well, that's an interesting point.
We have about a minute left. So.
Okay, well, you know, I Miriam's, a close friend of Miriam called me the day after she died. That would have been on Monday, October 5th, and I happened to be in Tompkins Square Park talking with some of our friends. And I mentioned, you know, that, and you know, I was, because it hadn't been, and we met someone from the New York Times, Colin Moynihan, and I said, well, you know, Miriam died, and I think there should be an obituary in the New York Times about this, and he called his editor about it.
Yeah,
but what
5
happened
seconds,
was
10 seconds
the
left.
Times considered it that Miriam wasn't important enough to be in the Times.
Philip VanAver, thank you so much for joining us
Okay.
on Let Them Talk. We're happy to have you again sometime to talk about politics on the Lower East Side. Thank you.
Well,
Good
thank
night.
you.
Thank you.